The backyard. It's supposed to be a place of sun-drenched afternoons and laughter. A place for family barbecues, for kids' games, your own private slice of the outdoors. It's the place where the boundary between your safe, cozy home and the wild world outside is clearly defined by a fence, a place of comfort, familiarity, and security. But for the people in the stories we're about to tell, that sanctuary became a source of unimaginable terror. They discovered that the most chilling hauntings weren't happening within the walls of their home. They were waiting just outside, in the shadows of the backyard. They learned that the very ground they walked on every day held secrets, and sometimes those secrets refused to stay buried. These are the accounts of hauntings, just beyond the back door, proving that the most terrifying place on your property might not be the attic or the basement. It might be the place you least expect. Story: the unnerving discovery in Ohio. And her boyfriend, Brandon, their house in East Columbus, Ohio, was a place of new beginnings. They'd been there for about a year, slowly making it their own with weekend projects and trips to the hardware store. In early October of 2024, the next big task was putting up a new fence. It was a perfectly ordinary job, the kind of thing millions of people do. Armed with a post hole digger, they picked a spot and started to break ground. Shovel after shovel of dirt was tossed aside. And then, a strange sound. Not the scrape of metals on rock, but a dull, soft thud. Something was down there, about 2.5 feet deep. Curious, they dug around it and realized it was something long, cylindrical, and heavy. With a lot of effort, they pulled on one end. What emerged from the dirt was bizarre and immediately unsettling: a large, thatch rolled-up rug, tightly bound and caked in damp soil. In a video that would later go viral, Katie asked the question anyone would: who and why is there a rolled-up carpet underground standing in their yard, a place meant for future parties? They were now staring at an object that just screamed secrets. Why would anyone bury a rug that deep? The innocent explanation is that it was just trash, buried by a lazy previous owner. But your mind doesn't go there first, does it? It leaps to darker possibilities. A buried rug is a staple of crime thrillers for a reason. It's for hiding things. The discovery cast a shadow over the house. Suddenly, a few weird incidents from the past week felt a little more sinister. Just days before finding the rug, Katie had come downstairs to find her laptop shattered and things on her desk thrown about. At the time, it was just a baffling, expensive mess. Now, standing over the buried rug, a chilling thought popped into her head. She posted about the strange events on TikTok, recalling, "I jokingly said, 'Did the body in the rug do it?' That joke spiraled into a very real, very public ordeal. As her story blew up online, millions of people got invested. The comments were a flood of theories, but the overwhelming message was clear: you need to call the police. Reluctantly, Katie did. It felt a little dramatic to call the authorities about old carpet. The first officers who showed up were skeptical, but agreed it was strange. They talked about maybe needing homicide detectives and excavators, but with no real evidence of a crime. Their hands were tied. They told her if she chose to dig it up herself and found something, call them back. Unsatisfied, and now with a massive online audience watching, Katie knew she couldn't just leave it. She found out the home only had one previous owner, an elderly couple now in their 90s. Hoping for a simple answer, she got in touch with their daughter. But the daughter was adamant they always cremated their pets. Wasn't an animal. With that easy explanation gone, the situation escalated. The police, maybe feeling the pressure from the public attention, decided to take a more serious look. On October 3rd, detectives returned, this time with K9 units. Katie live streamed it all on TikTok, her voice trembling as over 100,000 people watched. One of the cadaver dogs, trained to smell human decomposition, moved intently across the yard, circled the exact spot, and sat, a clear, undeniable alert. A second dog was brought in. It alerted in the same spot. You can hear Katie gasp in the video. The spooky little mystery had just become terrifyingly real. The next morning, her backyard was an active crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape. A tent went up, and 9 officers, including CSI, began to dig. For 5 hours, they dug, first with shovels. The officer was chest deep in the earth. Finally, the news came in a follow-up video. A shaken but relieved Katie announced, "There is no body." Police had excavated the area and found nothing but the disintegrating rug and some rubble. The case was closed, but for Katie, the questions remained. If there was no body, why did 2 highly trained cadaver dogs give a positive alert? And what really shattered her laptop? The police had an answer for the rug, but not for the strange events inside the house. The discovery in the yard had seemingly stirred something up. The ground was filled back in, but the sanctuary of their backyard had been violated. It was a stark reminder that even when a crime isn't found, it doesn't mean there isn't something wrong buried just beneath the surface. Transition 1. Some mysteries are awakened by a random act of digging, but in other cases, the soil. The horror is the soil. Our next story takes us to a quiet suburb near Houston, Texas, where one family discovered their American dream was built quite literally on a foundation of death. Story 2. The Cemetery Beneath. In the early 1980s, Sam and Judith Haney found their forever home in the newly developed Newport subdivision outside Houston. It was the picture of suburban paradise, a beautiful house, a big yard, and a peaceful neighborhood. They settled in, completely unaware of the morbid secret the developers had bulldozed over to create their idyllic community. The first hint that something was wrong wasn't a ghostly whisper. It was a quiet warning from a stranger. An elderly man who had lived in the area his whole life knocked on their door. He told Sam he'd noticed they were planning to put in a swimming pool and that he needed to know something about the property. The man led Sam into the backyard, pointed to a patch of grass, and said, "There are some graves right here." Sam was floored. The man seemed sincere, but the claim was outrageous. This was a brand new development. Still, the man's words stuck with him. He claimed to have buried people there himself as a teenager, even pointing to an old oak tree with an arrow and 2 lines carved into it, a marker he said he made for his 2 sisters buried beneath. The warning was easy enough to dismiss at first, but then the land itself seemed to betray its secret. The Haneys and other neighbors started noticing strange things. Toilets flushing on their own, TVs and faucets turning on and off. But the most disturbing signs were outside, where strange, rectangular sinkholes eerily shaped like coffins began appearing on their lawns. The dream was becoming a nightmare. Convinced the old man was right, Sam Haney rented a backhoe and started digging. It didn't take long to hit something solid. It wasn't a rock, it was wood. Switching to digging by hand, he uncovered rotting pine boards. When he lifted the first one away, his blood ran cold. There in the dirt was the unmistakable indentation of a human skeleton. They later found a second coffin, and inside, on a frail finger bone, were 2 wedding rings. The horrifying truth was now undeniable. Their home and the entire neighborhood had been built directly on top of the Black Hope Cemetery, a forgotten African-American burial ground. Records showed the developer, the Purcell Corporation, had noted a fence and a cross marking a grave before construction began. But they bulldozed it anyway. The cemetery was the final resting place for former slaves and their descendants, with possibly as many as 60 people buried there. The last in 1939. The bodies the Haneys found belonged to Betty and Charlie Thomas, a couple who had died in the 1930s. Deeply troubled, the Haneys reinterred the remains respectfully in their yard, hoping to bring peace. But according to their account, it was too late. The family reported that the paranormal activity intensified, and they weren't alone. A dozen other families began sharing stories of terrifying occurrences. One neighbor said she heard her back door open and heavy footsteps walk down the hall. But no one was there. Her husband came home to see 2 dark, human-like forms hovering in his kitchen. The Haneys' home became the epicenter. Judith's wall clock would allegedly spark and emit a strange blue glow. They reported hearing disembodied whispers and seeing shadows darting through their yard at night. It seemed the spirits were angry that their sacred ground had been violated for a housing development. The story bears a chilling resemblance to the plot of the 1982 film Poltergeist, where a family's home is built on a cemetery. For the residents who shared these stories, it felt like they were living it. Their backyards were places to relax. They were the desecrated resting places of forgotten souls. The haunting wasn't a single ghost. The haunting, they believed, was the land itself. Transition 2. A disturbed cemetery is a classic recipe for a haunting, a place where the dead have every right to be angry. But some backyards hold a terror that wasn't born from disrespect. It's a presence that might be ancient, malevolent, and was simply waiting for a new family to torment. Our final story comes from a family's terrifying account of their time in a historic home in Lamar, Arkansas, where the real evil wasn't in the house, but watching from the yard. Story 3. The Watcher by the Trees. In October 2003, Ben and Jamie Shea and their 3 young children moved into what they thought was their dream home. A beautiful 18th century colonial house outside Lamar, Arkansas. And a huge yard, perfect for their kids. The price was too good to be true. And as they settled in, they started to find out why. The fireplace was boarded up. Spray painted across the boards, though painted over, was a large pentagram. They tried to dismiss it as a teenage prank, but it was an unsettling discovery. The strange occurrences began subtly, unexplained knocking from the walls. Their 5-year-old son, Bridger, complaining of people talking in his room at night, toys turning on by themselves. Jamie would hear footsteps on the stairs when everyone was asleep. At first, it was just creepy, the kind of thing you might expect in a centuries-old house. But the activity began to feel more intelligent and more personal, and it seemed to have a focal point, the backyard. The knocking always seemed to come from the exterior walls facing the dark, tree-lined yard. Their daughter began talking about something watching her from her window. That feeling of being watched became constant for Ben and Jamie whenever they stepped outside. The yard itself felt heavy, and oppressive as dusk fell. It didn't feel like it was theirs. It felt like they were trespassing. The family story took a chilling turn during a chance encounter. Jamie was at Walmart when the greeter asked if she was the one who moved into the old house in Lamar. When Jamie said yes, the woman told her she had grown up there. "Yeah, it's haunted," she said, explaining a local legend about a young boy who had tragically died falling from a second-story window, the window in their son Bridger's room. She said the boy's spirit was harmless, but then she added something that made Jamie's blood run cold. She said that since her family had lived there, something else had arrived, something she could only describe as a demon. Suddenly, it all clicked into place for the family. The pentagram, the oppressive feeling, the escalating activity. They believed they weren't just dealing with a lost child, but with something truly malevolent, rooted in the land itself. The feeling of being watched was no longer paranoia. It was the terrifying certainty that something hostile was observing them from the shadows of the trees. According to their account, the activity became openly aggressive. Their son Bridger became the primary target, waking up screaming about a man with glowing eyes, whispering his name. The house seemed to drain their energy, leaving the whole family feeling sick and on edge. The terror peaked one night when one of the children looked out into the pitch-black yard and saw it, a tall, impossibly thin, shadowy figure standing motionless by an old oak tree at the edge of the property. Just watching the house, it had no features, just a silhouette of pure darkness. They were convinced this was the source of their torment. It wasn't a ghost trapped in the house. It was a predator that claimed the land, and they were the intruders. Desperate, the Shays eventually sought help, including from a priest who performed an exorcism. But even after, they said the feeling of dread never truly left. They understood this entity was tied to the land, to the yard that surrounded them. They fled the home, unable to live with the fear of what was watching from the darkness. Their account is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous entity isn't the one making noise in your attic, but the one standing silently in your yard, waiting for you to look. A backyard is supposed to be an extension of your home, a place of safety, sunlight, and life. But as these accounts suggest, it can also be a threshold to the unknown, a place where the secrets of the earth are buried just inches beneath our feet. For these families, the thin veil between our world and the next was torn open not by a seance, but by the simple act of digging a hole, building a home, or living on land with a history they couldn't have imagined. They learned that a fence is no protection from a presence that doesn't follow physical rules, and that the most terrifying discovery is realizing the place you're supposed to feel most secure, your own yard, is the very source of your fears. So next time you're in your backyard as the sun goes down and the familiar shapes of your garden start to melt into shadows, listen, and if you hear a twig snap in the darkness just beyond the patio light, remember these stories. You never really know what's buried just beneath the grass. If you've had an unsettling experience in your own backyard, we want to hear about it. Find the link to submit your story in the description below. And for more true stories that explore the darkness on the edge of our ordinary lives, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.